Let me just pull up. Let me just pull up my slides. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that. So I know most people are probably at least somewhat familiar with Bridge. We have been around for over 50 years now. This is a picture of our main headquarters, which is right in downtown Boston. We're across from the Visitor Center on the Boston Common, right at the corner of West and Tremont Street. And so Bridge works with youth and young adults, 14 to 24 years old, that are experiencing homelessness or at least at risk of experiencing homelessness. I always describe Bridge as kind of a multi-service agency that provides an array of programming for young people. We have kind of a whole continuum of residential services. We have what we call a welcome center, which is kind of like our night-to-night shelter. Then we have an emergency residence, which is like a short-term transitional program. We have a transitional living program and a single parent program. So those are kind of longer term residentials. And then we have a rapid rehousing program that houses young people in apartments, a lease in their name in the community for up to 2 years of both rental assistance and support services. Outside of our residential program, we have kind of a whole behavioral health therapy program at Bridge, where we're doing individual therapy with young people, but also intensive case management and really kind of life skills development. And then we have a HiSET or a GED class and kind of a whole career development program, aimed at helping to get access and linkages towards education, but also just thinking about career advancement and income maximization. So whenever I think about like kind of the theory of change at Bridge, it's always sort of, let's meet the immediate crisis needs, housing, stabilization, and then let's engage people in all the behavioral health services to work on stability, but again, also just kind of life skills to hopefully prepare them to engage in some of our other kind of career education type programs to hopefully set young people up for longer term success. We see about 2,000 young people a year at Bridge. We see about 1,000 just through our Medical Street outreach program. We have a mobile medical van that provides kind of urgent healthcare, kind of basic healthcare and referral. And they kind of canvass the city where young people hang out. And then we also try to go to some of the larger adult shelters if there's young people staying there. And then we see an additional 1,000 individuals just at our main headquarters. Like I said, down at West Street. About 80% of the young people that come into West Street are homeless. They have nowhere to go that particular night and, are looking for help. And about 20% are kind of that at risk of homelessness. They're struggling with things at home or wherever they're staying at the moment and are trying to get linked up to services. About 70% of the young people that come into Bridge actually used a program for less than 30 days. So again, I think it shows it's young people that are coming in a real crisis situation, really utilizing all of our crisis support in hopes of being able to find a more stable place where they can transition to. I often say, although we see young people 14 to 24 years old, just over 60% of the young people we see are actually 18 to 21. So I always think of that as kind of like our core group of young people that come in and the sort of core age group, that transitional age youth. Just over 85% are young people of color. So Bridge is kind of a very diverse organization. Probably 60% of the young people that we serve are from kind of the Dorchester, Roxbury area. About 20% identify as being part of the LGBTQ community. And almost half of the young people that come in report some sort of prior history with DCF or child welfare. It's not always out of home placements, but a large portion is certainly foster care and other DCF residential programs. And then out of all the young people that come in, we always ask kind of what led to their experience of homelessness at the moment. And what we see as the biggest reason that people report is some sort of family conflict. And I'll talk a little more about that in a moment, but that being kind of number one. And then the second being sort of aging out of kind of DCF support type programs, not having another place to go. And then the third being kind of what we always think of as like unaccepting relationships of often people, again, part of the LGBTQ community that, their families or wherever they're coming from are not very accepting of their lifestyle and have either been asked to leave or chosen to leave because of that. So those being kind of the three main reasons why people report being homeless when they come to Bridge. Bridge, just like every other organization out there, I think has experienced a lot of challenges as of lately. I always think when it comes to COVID, everybody has experienced a tremendous amount of COVID stress. And I think, we've seen it with, the sort of recent Surgeon General's report of the increase of behavioral health issues. And of course, you hear lots of stories and articles that have come out about difficulties among students in elementary, middle, and high school and beyond. So everybody's certainly experiencing a lot of stress. I always say for us at Bridge, I always think of it as our population of young people experiences a disproportionate amount of behavioral health issues under low stress circumstances. So when COVID comes in, it just heightens the amount of behavioral health needs that our population here at Bridge is already experiencing. So just like everywhere else, we've seen an increase in behavioral health issues among the population that we serve. Our emergency residence program, which is like a 10-bed, like I said, sort of shorter term transitional program, at one point last year had 10 residents there. And out of the 10 residents over the past year had a total of 24 inpatient hospitalizations kind of around suicidality and a decline in functioning. And that alone is a drastic increase in what we've seen in previous years here. And so when we think about like the stressors of COVID and how that's kind of increased the behavioral health needs of the young people that we see, that's kind of one of the big areas, is that overall functioning utilization of these acute crisis stabilization support services has really drastically increased. And then, of course, we've seen a kind of corresponding increase in substance use among a lot of the young people that we work with. I think certainly people often ask me, how has the legalization of cannabis impacted the work and what we see here? And I would say certainly a correlation of that has been a drastic increase in the amount of substance use in general, but certainly the amount of cannabis use that we're seeing among the young people at Bridge as well. This past, the first year of COVID, we did a research study here where we were able to look at 150 young people that came to Bridge, and we did this really robust, comprehensive, structured psychiatric interview with them to really get a kind of like, what are the rates of sort of DSM-5 behavioral health symptoms that people met for. And one of the things we looked at was cannabis use. And, cannabis use is sort of diagnostically categorized under mild, moderate, and severe based on how many symptoms you have. And one of the things that we saw was that for people that had a mild cannabis use disorder, on average met for one additional DSM-5 behavioral health disorder. For people that had moderate, met for an average of 2 additional behavioral health disorders. And people that had severe met for an average of 3. So sometimes you hear young people coming in talking about their perceived benefits of cannabis use, and that actually the more cannabis use seems to correlate very highly with additional behavioral health issues around depression, anxiety, and just kind of emotional regulation. So again, it's just a drastic increase, I would say, over the years of what we're seeing here. The way that we've kind of responded to a lot of these challenges, I would say in the beginning of the pandemic, is we were able to really expand our rapid rehousing program, which again is really designed as a low threshold, low barrier housing program for youth. We went from serving about 40 young people a year to, when the pandemic started, being able to serve about 150 a year in our rapid rehousing. So we were really able to kind of triple that program, which really was a tremendous help for our program and just our system here. We also were able to forge a really great partnership with Mass General Hospital and Healthcare for the Homeless, where we were able to provide psychiatry services on site here. So they can do psychiatric evaluations, but they can also do psychopharm prescribing and med management, which again was a really terrific kind of low barrier psychiatric service that we could provide here. I think for us, we certainly know that for young people coming in with increasingly difficult behavioral health issues, that we really needed to provide access to psychopharmacology interventions really from the outset to be able to provide the best services that we can. And then also this last year, we've undergone a really robust training in DBT, or dialectical behavior therapy. This is a evidence-based treatment that really centers around emotion regulation and kind of skill building from a behavioral perspective around those types of issues. All of our social workers here were able to participate in a 1.5-year-long training with the Behavioral Tech Institute, which is through Marsha Linehan, who created DBT. So a really robust training. And since then, we've been able to offer kind of a full complement of both individual, group, and skills coaching throughout all of our programming. So that's been a tremendous support and kind of one way we've been able to respond to the behavioral health challenges. We've also kind of started a lot of different interventions that we're currently studying in different research projects. Again, with cannabis in particular becoming much more of seen from the young people that come here as just a normative kind of part of their everyday existence here, and not really thinking about it as something that could be problematic. We created a 5-session, really psychoeducational intervention around substance use that we call My Best. It stands for Motivating Youth, Brief Experiences with Substance Treatment. And it's really about challenging people's kind of ideas around substance use while also exposing them to different pathways of recovery. This is something we're studying in a randomized control trial right now. We're just finishing up kind of comparing this to our usual intensive case management. So really looking forward to looking at results of that and moving on. We created another intervention that we call BART, which is another acronym that stands for Bridge Assessment, Referral, and Treatment Intervention. What we noticed for young people entering rapid rehousing, and again, we saw a drastic increase in this over the last couple of years, is that a lot of them were struggling with a lot of the basic life skills around job obtainment and all of those aspects of stability that are really important. And so in efforts to kind of accelerate that, we created this really brief 3-month intervention where people are actually receive a stipend and they're paid for engaging in the services. And I almost think of it as like a life skills boot camp in a way, to really hope that this sets people up for longer term success in rapid rehousing. And this is another one that we're gearing up to study in a randomized control trial in the coming year. And then lastly, as you see from one of the main reasons why people end up homeless at Bridge is because of family conflict. And so we really were noticing, and I think this corresponds a lot with the increase of COVID stress that families are just encountering as well, is that people were coming in and saying that they had a lot of conflict in their families. And when you drill down to it a little more, families were experiencing their adolescent, young adult as really having untreated behavioral health issues and struggling to connect them to services. And often it would just mount in frustration to where no longer they could stay there anymore. And so what we really tried to develop was like a rapid resolution kind of family-based crisis intervention to provide the families support, but then also a lot of education around why their young adult, kind of adolescent may be struggling, particularly around this idea of having some untreated problems. And then really looking at, is there a way we might be able to get them to remain at home while providing some intensive supports to link them up to other services and resources? to hopefully divert people from needing to enter the shelter system entirely, which we know just in and of itself is a very traumatic experience for young people. So that is kind of a newer intervention. We have some ideas around it. We've written up a manual we're piloting out, and hopefully over this next year for us, we'll be able to really assess, is that having an impact on diversion from the shelter system entirely, which would be great. And this is just my kind of contact information, and I will share that with Phil, who can share that with everybody as well. But that's kind of our bridge and some of who we serve, but then also just kind of some of the struggles and challenges that we've had lately, and hopefully how we're able to meet these challenges and respond to it.
Yeah. So Jennifer will respond, but Katrina, I think you had a quick question about foster care kids in the system.
Yeah, so thank you. So on one of your slides, you mentioned that a cause, in addition to kind of family conflict, was people aging out of foster care. And so I wondered if you had a percentage that went along with that in terms of the young people that you find yourself serving.
Yeah, so we see actually about 20% report kind of aging out. Now, what that actually looks like, though, it differs for people. One of the things when you look at DCF in Massachusetts is they have whether you age out versus like leaving, it's kind of signing yourself out, services afterwards can sometimes look differently. And often what we're working with is a group of young people that are kind of disenchanted with the services that they are receiving. Often DCF is trying to convince them to sort of sign in for voluntary, receive other services. And they're kind of saying, I don't want any part of the department anymore. And we're kind of serving in the middle of saying, okay, like, well, what are the other resources, kind of housing stuff that might be available, while also thinking about how else to leverage the resources that you might be receiving in the department. So it's not always, geez, no aftercare was set up or identified. And so now somebody's, 20 years old, they have nowhere to go.
It sounds like the approach, what you're saying, and I want to make sure I'm hearing right. I'm sorry for cutting you off. It sounds like the approach is developmentally inappropriate, like it never changes. So young people, like they're still being treated as if they're the 7-year-old with the service, as opposed to an adult making young adult decisions. So that makes a lot of sense. I'd want to be separated from that too.
Yeah, that's actually a fantastic way to think about it in terms of development.
Yeah. Okay. Jennifer just sent me a message saying she thinks it's a great use of time for the funders to jump in with questions at this point. So I don't know if people have any other questions or observations they'd like to make. Jump in. I'd be interested, Peter, in your war stories about the height of the pandemic and how that affected your operations. How are you able to deal with this very mobile, probably very, from a health standpoint, high risky population?
Yeah, so I always, people often ask how has COVID affected us, and I always start by saying it affected all facets of the organization and really challenged our capacity to serve our mission and our work. Right from I can think about it in different kind of categories. There's like the kind of staffing issues that of course come along, and a pandemic comes up and nobody's really sure what's going to happen, and so the idea of, well, who wants to work in any kind of congregate care setting under those circumstances, right? So just maintaining those operations are really challenging. One of the things that we also saw during that time is families where like their adolescents perhaps were not taking at the very beginning of the pandemic, it very serious, or taking the precautions around social distancing and those things, and that creating just an increase in tension at home and leading to a lot of people needing to leave the home, right? So that was like something where, of course, a lot of other businesses can go remote or pause and those other things, and that's not really something you working in the homeless community that you have an option of. So it's constantly figuring out, well, in our space, how do we keep people as safe as possible, deal with this somewhat of a new influx of people kind of coming in while also being challenged by some of the staff shortages to maintain operations.
And those shortages, I take it from our discussion yesterday, have been very profound for Bridge and for other sort of frontline youth organizations.
Yeah, I think again in the beginning, perhaps a lot of fear on sort of working in these types of settings, and then of course after that, it's us. I always say competing in a job market where there's remote opportunities and other things like that have continued. Even though I think most people feel like COVID is in a much more manageable position, that still we are at the same kind of staffing shortages, competing with other industries and other people that can offer different types of work options, as opposed to what we're able to here.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and Leslie has posted a question here. Do the young people engage with dialectical behavioral theory? Do I have this right? Since it takes commitment, do many young people participate and do the full DBT to gain emotional regulation skills?
So a couple of things that was surprising to me. Most of the young people that come here have some experience with DBT prior. Perhaps not a full intervention, but have heard of it, is like kind of familiar with the concept of mindfulness and distress tolerance and those types of things. In terms of the full kind of like complement of DBT, it's actually a really intensive time commitment. It's a 26 weeks of group, 26 of individual. We have a very few that are able to commit to the full kind of complement of DBT when you think about the fidelity of DBT. However, I would say everybody is able to commit to some way of it being infused in their individual care here, not just the individual therapy, but also like kind of the skills coaching within our residential programs. And we actually created a modified group that is 8 weeks long, and it's like 2 weeks for each skill, 2 weeks of mindfulness, 2 weeks of emotion reg, 2 weeks of distress tolerance, and interpersonal effectiveness. And most people are able to commit to that.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Peter.
It's maybe I'll build a bridge to talking, Phil, if that works for you all, and then I'll try to be short to open it up for practice for more questions. But the question about young people accessing DBT and being able to participate in the full range of clinical / therapeutic intervention is one that is at the heart of kind of Roca's approach, which has shifted over the last 10 years to include a form of CBT that we have created. And like what Peter talked about in some of the interventions that they've adapted, we've really thought about our work with this group of young adults who are not engaging in traditional services or therapeutic or mental health or physical health as skill building. So skill teaching, skill building, skill practice, and a little bit less as a clinical or therapeutic intervention. So it draws on all of the research behind CBT and DBT and has made this intervention more accessible. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but Peter, there's so much I want to hear about some of the interventions that you are working on, particularly the one I think it's called My Best around smoking a lot of weed, which is, or using a lot of weed, however it is your young people are doing it. Phil, I can jump in, or people want to keep asking questions.
I think you should jump right in.
Jump right in?
Yeah.
Jump right in, jump right in. I am gonna share my screen and just say, my name's Jennifer Clammer, and I actually worked at Roca 25 years ago, and came back to help Roca start the Impact Institute, which is our training and coaching arm. And is my screen sharing the PowerPoint at this point? Great.
Yes.
And so I do a lot of our training and coaching work with other cities and other agencies that are interested in working with young adults at the center of violence. I'm going to talk less about that and more about Roca's model, with the caveat that some of your detailed questions or some of the questions that come up may be better for somebody else on my team. But I think most folks know that Roca specifically works with the 16 to 24-year-olds who've experienced extensive trauma and are the primary victims and drivers of violence. So one of the things, we share some young people in common with Bridge, but we are pretty clear and have gotten clearer about saying it's not just general at-risk young people or young people who have specific behavioral health issues that we work with. It is really young adults who are in the middle of the criminal justice system and are heavily engaged and at risk of shooting or being shot. We've been around for our 35-year anniversary is coming up. We have 5 locations in Massachusetts, so Chelsea, Boston, Springfield, Holyoke, and Lynn. We had 4.5 years ago, we opened our first site in Baltimore and are now serving 250 plus young men in Baltimore and expanding to the county. And we just expanded our young women's program to Hartford, and we are bringing it to Boston as well, small caseload to Boston. So when we think about who we work with, on the one end, the easiest way to talk about the young people that we work with, the way I think about it is the people that know, we get the most referrals from police, probation, and parole. That's where we get the bulk of our young people from. We don't get a ton of young people from school systems. We don't get a ton of young people from other social supports. We get them mostly through the criminal justice system. And they're highly not engaged with existing infrastructure, and they're ages 6 and 24. We really serve young men, except our young women's program, which I can talk about separately, but I'm going to focus on young men here. I like to say that when we onboard our staff, so to help staff really understand a little bit about who we serve, I talk about if a young person can go through a youth build program, they can complete a job training program that is structured. They're in community college. They're not the right young person for us. So if they can do something else that is more on a traditional track towards education or employment, and they're able to show up over time and make progress, they're likely not the right young person for us. And we say they should do that. We really are working with young people that are not ready, willing, or able to be engaged with traditional programming. I'm going to talk a little bit about our kind of programmatic model, which is a 3 to 4 year behavior change model. But at the heart of our design is this concept, is that only a minority, usually less than 20% of a population at risk, is prepared to take action at any given time. So we use the stages of change model for Bochansky and DiClemente, which really talks about the readiness for people to change behavior and to make changes. And we think about most of our young adults as being in the pre-contemplation phase. And the work that we do over the 3 to 4 year process is actually trying to get them to contemplation and planning. So it's so most of our work happens outside of the building or outside of traditional programming. So the bulk of our staff that work with the young adults are youth workers or some form of education or employment folks, but the bulk of our staff are youth workers. Our youth workers are also our case managers. and we don't actually employ any clinicians. So we contract and subcontract out with our clinical providers to provide care in our buildings, but we found that providing clinicians and having folks, be in the building didn't really work for us in a traditional way. So our model is anywhere between 3 and 4 years. Our core outcomes are reducing recidivism and increasing employment. So less jail, more employability. We, interestingly enough, don't look at young person outcomes before the first 18 months of time with us. That is like a very different way of thinking about this work. We look at our inputs. We sometimes look at outputs, but what we're really trying to figure out is, are we being strategic about finding young people where they are, about looking and making contacts that we have studied, so 3 to 5 in-person contacts, face-to-face contacts a week. Are we doing the work that we know, putting the inputs in that we know helps young people move from pre-contemplation to contemplation in this area, specifically around creating safety and stability? So Peter talked a lot about, like, how do we meet basic needs? We do a lot of the basic needs meeting, right? Like, how do we help you move from couch surfing to getting to a regular bed, which for our young men is usually not a shelter or even an apartment, because there's often too many other things happening that they don't want to comply with the rules. Let me just say it. Right now, a lot of our young men are not in that space, but we might say, oh, you're at this friend's house. Can we help you get to this friend's house, because this friend's house is a little bit safer for you? So it's a real harm reduction piece. You're living at home, but there's no electric. Let's talk to you and grandma about how we help get the electric turned on. So there's a lot of basic needs work, and the key is meaningful connections. Again, it can take 6 to 9 months for us to really feel like we've got somebody ready to start engaging in what I would call in the building programming. So the other thing that has really changed in the last 10 years for Roca is this use of CBT. So, and I'm going to spend a little time talking about this, but I think Roca's street outreach work and Roca's engagement work has been heavily informed by the idea that the young people we work with and the communities that we work with are profoundly impacted by trauma. And this understanding of how trauma impacts the brain, right, which I know that you probably know a ton about, but we spend a ton of time teaching our staff and our young people and our community partners about what happens developmentally based on the sustained impact of trauma, whether it's systemic trauma that's caused by poverty and institutional racism, or individual trauma or complex trauma. One of the things that happens is, we all have the propensity to go into our bottom brains. And when we get stuck in our bottom brains, our reasoning gets turned off, right? Our prefrontal cortex gets turned off. So the flip for us in this kind of understanding this model was, we were doing a lot of talking to young people about decisions and consequences. That lives up in this prefrontal cortex, right? And so that's kind of fundamentally within the violence intervention field is a credible messenger, safe relationship, learn from my mistakes. We've been missing this piece around how do we help people understand how to move out of fight, flight, and freeze, become more aware, understand what's happening, and build skills to interrupt unhelpful patterns over time. And that has been a game changer for us. Did somebody pop off? I thought I heard somebody come off of mic. Is it my feedback? Okay. So we start in our street outreach work with our youth workers. We start using CBT right away. We train 100% our staff in CBT. We call it cognitive behavioral theory, not therapy. It's a skill-based curriculum a lot. I think, I don't want to over compare, Peter, but it sounds like there's some similarities, right? We developed this form of CBT called Rewire in partnership with MGH. And our youth outreach workers start that right away, right? The minute they feel like they've got some reasonable ability to find and be in contact with a young person, they start using CBT right away.
Can you give us just a quick little illustration of how that interchange might take place? What sorts of things you do? Don't steal your show, but
no, I wish I had, you know what? I'm in my upstairs office and I'm so sorry to say that because our CBT, we use key cards. So we have these, our CBT is on these little plastic cards that all of our youth workers wear around their neck.
I think there's an image in one of your pictures.
Oh, there is. Let's see. Am I that? Oh, right here.
Nope. Go to that one.
There it is. See this image of these key cards?
yes.
Katrina, thank you. That's what we use, and you can see, so we have them on key cards and we have them on our phone and our tablets. And as part of COVID, all of our staff got equipped with tablets to be able to do all of our education and programming work, both virtually and with masks on the street corner, because our guys, you know, they didn't go inside, so we kept working and did a lot of this. So the way that it might work is, I mean, the most common skill, the most two common skills we use the most right now are be present and label your feelings, right? So in a moment, if you have a strong enough relationship with a young person, right, and they're really hot, the skills of be present, which is really about how do you bring your body down from that red zone. Sometimes it's breathing, sometimes it's walking and talking, sometimes it is changing location, sometimes it's feeling a cold ice cube in your hand. That's a skill that we use. And so let's say for the first time a youth worker tries it in a moment with a young person, says, let's walk around the block for a second and breathe. Let's just take a step out, right? That's practicing the skill. It becomes incumbent upon the youth worker to talk about when the young person is not hot and not in that moment, what they were teaching, right? Here's what's happening in our brain. They go right into, here's what fight, flight, freeze is. Here's the role of interrupting that with a skill around be present, right? It is, so they use key cards, they have it in conversation. You can go out with any of our youth workers, they have tablets, key cards, they're talking about it. I will say, interestingly enough, we capture our efforts to outcomes. We use ETO, we capture which skill we've used, and our goal is to teach all of our young people in workshop series in some way, shape, or form, the full curriculum of 7 skills and the Think, Feel, Do cycle twice, right? We try and we have workshops. They can be 15 minutes, they can be 30 minutes. Some of our young people make it into the building to do it, and some of our young people don't. We can do it on the street as a skill building. We try and do that twice, and then we try and do 3 CBT contacts a week across all of our staff. And we, you can see some staff really, some staff are more comfortable teaching some skills than others. So we look at that data and we go back in, because it's sometimes the skill is not about your comfort level. It needs to be about what's happening for the young person, right? These are very situation-based skills. So anyway, our staff do that. We track it. We use a youth tracker. We use weekly supervision. Every single one of our staff meetings opens with a reflection on how they're using CBT, or there's a practice of a skill. It's in everything we do. This other piece here, this practice skills, relapse and repeat. I'm going to go back to this slide, I started by saying our behavior change model is 3 to 4 years. One of the key pieces around working with young people who are not ready, willing, or able to engage in traditional programming is that you have to expect them to not show up and to not be able to respond to structure and to try things in relapse. And so part of our brain science work is to teach this model. It's built into our curriculum around the role of relapse, is that relapse is a normal part of change. And when we say relapse, we don't mean substance abuse relapse, although sometimes that's what it is. We often mean it in the frame of behavior. And the way that we see it, right, in our work is we have spent 6 to 9 months with a young person. Our relationship is solid. They're ready to start our transitional employment crew. They go and do that work for, I don't know, they show up for 7 days in a row and are excellent, and then they disappear. That's a relapse for us. You can't find them, and they're ghosting you, and you show up at their grandmother's house, and you can, you can see them in the back, right? And you can't get them. That's a relapse for us. And so with whenever we do that, we have to work to build that relationship and trust and bring them back in. And really it's about this change piece, right? It's like, oh, I've made some progress. I'm going backwards, right? It's scary. I'm more comfortable in my old habits. This is what I know. And so all of our roles around this journey, around safety and stability, teaching skills, is to help accelerate the learning in our practice, in our transitional employment, in our HiSET GED, in our workforce and certifications process. It's to say, hey, let's use our safe relationships with you and our trust. Let's help you use your new skills so that when you start to make progress, we can, and you relapse, which is normal, we can help get you back in. I mean, that's the essence of the journey we take. It is a very, very, it is just a very different way of doing program design. And it's a very different way. And as we talk about this as a funding network, right? When most of our networks think about the question about, do young people go through the intensive DBT? Can you get outcomes and results in 6 to 9 months? Have they gone from criminal justice to employment? It doesn't take this into account. It takes a longer time for us to change behavior. That's what the research shows. The other thing that I know you all have heard about in terms of focus of our work are the ways that we work with the critical agencies that also interact with this group of young people. For us, that is largely police, that is largely probation, that can be DCF or DYS. It can be some social service care providers, but this idea that we really think about not only how to wrap around, right, in the traditional case management approach, but how to think differently about what it takes to engage this group. So we do these conversations around brain science and behavior change with all of our partners. We've co-trained our partners in circles and CBT. This idea of how do we stay in contact to understand if we really want to work with this group of young men who are so at high risk and we want to keep them alive long enough so they can do this behavior change, what are the ways that we have to work differently together? I talked a little bit about our CBT approach and implications for the work, right? This is a slide that I adapted slightly from a workshop that we do with other nonprofits that are thinking about working with young men who are at the center of violence. The things we talk about is continue to think about the impact of trauma on the brain and the brain science. Right? Like, what do we know about behavior change? It's about changing habits and then helpful habits. You need practice, you need skills, and you need time. This idea of thinking about people's readiness and what they need to access services, bringing services to where people are and meeting them where that people are, which is something, Bridge knows a ton about as well. bringing more, preparing staff who are what I would call for this conversation paraprofessionals, non-traditional staff to actually deliver interventions. So to do community-based behavioral health, community-based interventions is critical. Integrate relapses, right, into your process and your program. This idea of, wow, you're absent 7 times, you're out, is a very, very strong construct in all of our non-traditional programming, whether it's education or workforce development. Well, how do we plan for people to be absent, right? Because if they could be there, they would be. And how do we teach them the skills to be there over time? And really advocating for a longer horizon around behavior change. I'm going to stop share. Okay. Leslie had a question
Yes.
in here. How do your workers on the street connect with youth on the street and repeat contact? Can you tell me what you mean?
I just was wondering, because it sounds like the workers engage with certain individuals.
They have a
but you're
caseload.
but you're meeting them on the street. And so I'm just wondering.
How do they find them?
Yeah.
So we have, so every morning and every afternoon, our teams check in and talk about who they found and help each other. So if we have a team of 10 youth workers and they've decided for the week who they have to find, where they need to find them, they go out, they look, they come back, they go out, they look, they talk to one, that individual tells them where the other is. And then sometimes, and if in most cases, another street worker might run across the caseload, right? So we share our caseloads in that way and says, oh, I'm going to call Jamal right now and tell him I see so-and-so on the corner over here. Come on over. Happens all the time. It's the contact and the planning that matter. We have a tracker. Everybody has an intentional plan for the week. And everybody talks about it in staff meetings. Does that help?
Jennifer, Katrina
That's-
also had a question, if you could get.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but yeah.
Is it up here? How do your youth, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I'm just scrolling up. How do your youth workers case managers understand how to balance their skill set versus when they might need more clinical expertise? It is all about the same, almost the same answer, which is it's high meeting, high supervision. That we really, our youth workers get an hour of supervision every week, and they go through their entire caseload with their supervisor, one by one, and both the youth worker and supervisor have to talk about their next steps. So we do training on crisis management and crisis identification, like baseline training, but this concept of how do we build the judgment skills and perspective of our youth workers? I mean, really, that's what you're asking, right? Like, how do our youth workers know how to ask for help when they need it? How do they know when something is dangerous for them or for a young person? It's all about training and supervision and regular contact. We have a group text, a group me that goes every morning, talks about all the hot situations, including if a young person is showing signs of a crisis. So it's a heavy communication model, and it takes some time. I'm just looking down. Have we lost staff during COVID? So Peter and I, in our planning with Phil, both talked about the challenges of staffing. Yes, we have. So we did reduce staff during COVID. And we did that intentionally very early on. And then we built back up and are now larger. Our staff team is larger post-COVID. We, like Peter, we've done a lot of work thinking about staff benefits, compensation. We've kind of done a whole overhaul. Our issue has been less about losing staff and more about expanding and hiring new staff and finding quality staff. So where we might have gotten 200 applications for something, we now get 8. And it's because the job market is really competitive, and a lot of young professionals, I mean, they don't want to do they don't want to do residential, they don't want to do street work. People have a chance to do remote work. And so we're doing a lot of recruitment by word of mouth. And our partners have lost a ton of staff. That's where we're feeling it. Our probation and young adult and adult probation staff, I mean, caseloads, our case managers that we work with, DCF, everybody's hurting. Staffing huge.
Yeah, which seems to be an across the board issue in
It's
America.
huge. Yeah. And how do you prevent burnout around youth work? So I'll tell you, I mean, Peter, I'd be really interested in what you do around staffing, but the biggest challenge for our youth workers around burnout is the loss of young people. I think it's less the actual work. It's when the work, it feels like when, you know, you're losing young people or young people are in harm's way and you can't do anything. That is our biggest burnout issue. And that is real. And we go through waves organizationally when things are really hard. We use peacemaking circles as one of our big structures for processing hard situations, scary situations, grief, feelings around loss, feelings around being ineffective, which is really huge, right? And I think that's our biggest. We use them with staff. We have them regularly, large, small, with young people to process situations, with families to process situations. So I think our really the amount of time we spend connecting around the actual core work in young people versus around external, like, you know, we don't do a ton of traditional HR trainings. We spend our time talking about the work and what it means for our staff and our young people and how to do the work better. I think that's I think that is one of the ways we do it. But I will tell you, we have some staff who are really hurting right now. They've really lost some kids in the past couple of years. And it's hard. Peter, I don't know what you experience in there, but.
I would say similar. The work here, similar to Roka, is very challenging. We're working with young people that are often experiencing just profound behavioral health issues and trauma. For us at Bridge, within programs, like 60% of the positions are more entry-level human service roles. And, this is really not the type of position to kind of get your feet wet and decide if you're going to pursue a career in social work or human services. It really requires some more skills. So you need not just supervisors, but more seasoned staff as mentors that can help to provide some guidance. And that really, I think, makes a big difference in supporting the team here.
Excellent. I don't know if either of you have any parting words of advice for funders, which is sort of our day job, moving the money around.
I mean, I think, and Peter, I welcome your thoughts. I think it's going to be harder and harder for organizations like Bridge and Roka to find clinicians. I mean, that's true for the world, particularly around adolescent and youth clinicians. And I think from what I'm hearing from Peter and what I know to be true about Roka is we're doing a lot of thinking about how we bring critical skills and supports to the young adults we work with and how we prepare what's traditionally considered, paraprofessionals or frontline staff to do that. And to do that in an alternative way. And I really think, how do we remove the barriers and how do we increase access and think out of the box around that is going to be a huge forefront. And we're going to feel it the most with the highest risk to start.
The only other thing I would add, obviously, staffing is certainly a tremendous challenge. I would say any opportunities to continue to focus on innovation within these kind of staffing challenges, I think is really important. I think of Roca as a great partner of ours, and I think of intervention like CBT, which is perhaps one of the most common and sort of well-known psychotherapeutic interventions, but they've taken it and made it in such a unique adaptation to their work that's really innovative. I think anytime even smaller organizations can focus a little more on carving out some time, even among the staffing and other complex issues that happen, to focus on continuing to develop innovation is really important, and hopefully something that can be really valued among the funding community.
Awesome. Any other questions, comments before we move to our next part of the session? Well, Peter and Jennifer, I really want to thank you, from the bottom of my heart, for coming in and giving us such a great session at such short notice. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us. It was great for me to I'm a fan of Bridge, so it was great for me to hear some more. Thank you. Thank you. For
I think it goes without saying, we're all fans of Bridge and Roca and have done a lot of things with you over the years. So you're recognized for your good work.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
So we're now in the executive session, which is really, I think we'll spend most of it on planning for grants, but I don't know if you had any quick comments about today's session you'd want to share. Yes, Leslie.
I just think though they're both, I'm really impressed with the work that of each of these organizations, both Bridge and Roca. And my daughter is a clinical social worker at Dimick Center, and works with youth and refers a lot to these programs. And actually our foundation gives to both of them. They are top notch, and I was just really impressed.
Good. Well, I was too. And Mindy, you're a therapist as well. I don't know if you've ever had any encounters with these groups or have any comments.
Well, I did when I began my work after getting my master's at Lesley. I worked in an agency that was specifically geared to substance abuse and addiction. So it was interesting to hear that part about relapses, whether it be with behavior or with the substance, that somebody is addicted to. And that's just seems so right. That idea of not planning for it, but accepting that it is part of it. I think it's even part of children's growth, that they take steps forward and then they regress somewhat. So they just seem like they are so aware of how to work with the populations they're working with and taking care of their staff also. That was really impressive. It was really very impressive and inspiring and hopeful that there are people out there who are working in such a caring way. Yeah.
Good.
And to me, actually, I couldn't help but think about Mary Walsh talking about how, all the services need to go to all the kids, and they destigmatize by having, not care plans, but plans for all the kids. And I'm thinking, yeah. And now I hear this, I'm like, oh, wow. These people need specialized services that Roca and Bridges are dealing with the most difficult situations with people. Yeah,
But interestingly, both sort of dealing with destigmatization
yes,
in their ways.
yeah. But very different,
Yeah,
or very different stages in life.
right.
Mm. Mm.
Well, maybe we can just do a quick talk about grant engineering because we're getting near that point where we have 185,000 to spend. Now, in terms of the raw dollars, we have in past years tended to make kind of a small number of grants. Last year, we departed from that model, Irina, and we made 8 grants, but that's sort of not been typical. It's been, usually 30, 40, 50, somewhere in there. With 180, you could do what, 460 and then round it out with another one. So I don't know if grant size is important to any of you here, but I think we'll probably shoot for the larger grant this time. And then Judy, maybe you can quickly go over past year criteria for these grants and
Yeah, so what we do, I know some of you are familiar with this because you've participated in the past, but our team curates a list of prospective grantees and write about them for your consideration. So how we rate them is pretty subjective, am I right? It is pretty based on these kind of big criteria. So the expertise of the organization, clearly these 2 that we spoke with today are prime examples of expertise. Representative leadership of the population that the organization serves, thought leadership in the field. Is the organization at an inflection point where a grant would really bring them into an innovative space or into a new geography? We put a lot of value on this collaborative approach that both of these organizations described. And the impact of a grant from this fund. So unless there's something else that you would like us to consider in our write-ups of prospective grantees, this is what we will evaluate them, if that's the right word, on or describe them. These are the terms in which we'll describe them. Is that what you had in mind, Phil?
yeah, that's sort of the rough framework. And if that
Yeah.
works with people, we'll stick with it, but feel free to jump in.
Yeah.
There's been a fire hose of information about mental health that you get from the New York Times or the Globe or wherever you pick your poison. Many pieces have been written. So we know that there is in fact some kind of a mental health crisis that came out of COVID for young people. It's well documented by the Surgeon General. We know that government, in its way, large and small, is responding or about to respond, so that it's very likely that there will be substantial new dollars coming from the federal government and from the state of Massachusetts. So I think there is a large kind of scale response. Is that our response? Probably not. We also know that some of our distinguished funding peers have done large-scale funding initiatives. And I always think of Richard Susan Smith and the Klarman Foundation and what they've done with community health centers. Massive. That was a $10 million commitment. And I think it's really setting up these community-based centers to do better work in the field of child behavioral mental health and to make it so that fewer kids are just going to the emergency room, which seems to be a bit of a crisis. So that's a large scale intervention, and you keep reading about these things. I think what we're looking at probably is sort of our grantee community and who is kind of taking the ball now and moving in interesting sort of innovative ways. So these tend to be lower budget organizations. They tend to be doing something at an inflection point. They're building up their mental health in a way. And speaking of all that, you know, media information, the one that sticks in my mind is somebody's opinion piece in the Globe saying, it's time to talk about mental health. When we look at this list that is sort of evolving, there are some organizations that you wouldn't think would be talking about mental health that are starting to talk about mental health. And by talk, I mean they're staffing up with clinical staff. And I think given their size of development, their growth trajectory, these might be good grantees. That said, you know, there are kind of in this sort of mid-tier organizational level, there are kind of anointed groups like Raw Artwork, which has been doing this behavioral therapy forever. Doc Wayne Youth Services, which was a social innovation forum grantee and combines this kind of sports and talk therapy in school and other settings. They've been doing it for a while, you know, certainly before COVID. I don't know if we would include such organizations on the list. The Tower Foundation has its own experience working in Essex County. They're a New York-based foundation, but they're real mental health experts, and they gave us a few leads. Brian Gold from the Mass Early Childhood Funder Collaborative gave me a list. People at GMA keep adding names. I don't know if you have any pets on your own list, and pet is not the right word, but candidates for an award here where you think a real impact could be made, but we'd be really interested to hear from you. And I imagine we'll get our short list in order in about a week or so. And can share that even before doing the write-ups. I think that might be a good idea. And I was expecting to maybe make a few phone calls to funders who aren't with us right now. Yes, Leslie.
Yeah, what about I might get this wrong, JRI, or the
Yeah,
program that also supports the sexually trafficked
yes,
people, but JRI, is it JRI?
yeah.
Yes.
So that would be an interesting case study. I think we could certainly throw a program in the mix. You know, I have a trustee with the Riley Foundation who was talking about a similar one with the May Institute, which is very large, deals with people on the spectrum. Both are very, very large organizations. So the question would be, are they a good fit for this fund or not? And I wonder, you know, I think, you know, some of our clients really draw this line with budget size, and it's a useful exercise up to a point where they will, you know, will fund organizations say up to 5 million, but not any higher than that. JRI is in the hundreds of millions, as is the May Institute. So it almost feels that the impact of such a grant would maybe be less than for some of the ones on the ground, the smaller grassrootsy ones. But we're certainly open to, you know, you should send me an email if you find the program and we could check it out.
That just makes me wonder if Bridge, how they deal with anyone that comes to them that's at risk or has been sexually trafficked at all.
Well, I'm sure they do. And I'm sure, you know, this trafficking is a huge thing, as Nancy can tell you. We funded a group in Dorchester, I think the Compass program, which specializes in, it's got a whole unit that deals with trafficked kids.
Huh.
That's, I mean, it's a real thing.
Oh, yes.
Uh,
Mm. Okay.
Any other thoughts? Rena, Dewey? Okay, well,
Can I
Wait,
just
Leslie.
ask one other question? And I feel like sorry that I'm asking so many questions. So are there organizations that are supportive of youth to prevent incarceration that we might consider?
I think Roca, that's one of Roca's primary
Right.
goals, right?
yeah. Now, there are groups like UTEC up in Lowell
UTEC.
that are quite similar to Roca in their street outreach model. There are others. Think of Boston Uncornered in Dorchester, used to be College Bound Dorchester, used to be Federated Dorchester Neighborhood Houses. They're working with the most at-risk young people in the city who are responsible for most of the violent crime. Real focus though on education there. I'm sure there's a bit of a behavioral health thing, but the real focus is to just, you know, get people to get their high sets and then get into college even. So I think maybe less of a behavioral health slant. Certainly nothing as sophisticated as what Roca is doing.
One thing that Jennifer spoke about, though, that I thought was interesting was, and maybe Leslie, you reacted to this, is that they think less about the therapeutic aspect of their program and more about the skills building. And yeah, that just seemed like a valuable, practical way to scale, you know, that not everybody can go through a 24-week program.
Right. And probably the way to go with that population.
I do have a question about how we'll think about the grants, given that in one of our sessions, we really focused on early childhood and the expansion of, you know, preschool programs, and in the next, in the after school, you know, out of school programs, and then this is an entirely different population. So I do wonder about that bridging of
Yeah. I also
the
think,
age groups.
you know, I've had a glimpse of some very strong advocacy coalitions for mental health, which may be low budget, and this just might be the right time. And I don't think we're quite there yet, but Tower Foundation recommended one or two of those. So yes, early childhood ed, boy, talk about a field with workforce issues. They have it. I mean, a lot of people on the front line took a heavy hit during COVID and got out of the field. It's a kind of a big business. So I noticed, for instance, that the nursery, which is a very large kind of affiliate of childcare providing in Boston, has family and institutional, just got a large grant from Boston Children's Hospital for some kind of behavioral health thing, which is new. Now, are they too big for us? Is it too big businessy for us to make an impact with this fund? I would wonder. And I haven't seen other, if you know, if you have an entire sector which is a little bit under kind of fight, freeze mode, childcare, are they in a position to be innovating on behavioral health for their kids? You know, I haven't seen it yet, but it might exist. If you find it, let us know. Shall we leave it at that? Are there any other things we should be covering, Judy?
No, but I mean, not unless somebody has questions or comments that they'd like to make now. I think as we think about this grant decision-making. We'll put some thoughts together, and Phil may very well reach out to you before our next meeting, so that when we get together, our conversation is directed.
So as your question, Judy, I think about the different
Yeah.
age groups. So I would just love it if there was some in each, you know, so that it would kind of was, whoops, turn off my,
Okay, well, that's helpful. And, we can easily set up something that would cover the bases in terms of age. Yeah.
Yeah, because they felt very different. And, I mean, they are very different, clearly, but the focus of each session was. Right.
Good. Well, speaking of staffing challenges, I want to give a shout out to a person who's not here, who was running these sessions, and that's Danielle Belanger, who has, lucky for her, got a great job with the new nonprofit called Impala, which has been heavily funded, I think, by the Boston Foundation and the Barr Foundation. So it's an exciting new job for her, but she's not with us to see this through, unfortunately. So we're doing our best, and I know we're going to make some good grants, but I just wanted to recognize her good work. Okay. Okay.
Thanks, Phil. And thanks to everyone for coming. I thought that was super interesting.
me too.
Okay. Bye-bye.